most of us will never be afforded the grace of failing forward. We will never benefit from the affirmative action of generational wealth. If we bankrupt a business or choke in a crisis, we don't get a second, third, or fourth chance. If things don't go our way, we don't have the luxury of whining or cheating others to get further ahead. No. I want to know who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs.
Hi, I'm Ana Marie Cox, and welcome to 90 Days with Ana Marie Cox. 75 days until the election. I'm here with Elizabeth Spiers, who is a digital consultant in Democratic elections, as well as a contributing writer to the New York Times opinion section. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So last night was a night 2 of the Democratic convention. It feels like it's been longer than that. Is it
Yes.
me?
Yes, it's been a long month in the last 24 hours. So.
And they definitely did a lot of things right. You know, I think the turning the roll call into a very well DJ'd like wedding reception was top notch.
Yes.
So good. I know that for those of us of a certain age, having Dre be the music that our future possible president get nominated to is like a big, you know.
Yeah, Gen Xers and millennials are in power now, whether anybody likes it or not.
And we control the playlist, which is the true power, right?
Yes.
So what was interesting to me is, you know, the headliners of the night were Michelle and Barack Obama. And to me, it felt like two different eras being represented. I mean, technically, I think they're both boomers.
Yeah.
Barack's a little older, but it felt like some tension there. And I know, whatever, Barack's gonna Barack. Soaring rhetoric. One dick joke. With the little chuckle that we all know and love. And then Michelle, it felt like, let's put it this way. I feel like Obama's speech could have been given almost any point during the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And Michelle's speech was the speech that needed to happen last night.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, part of that is that Michelle's famous comment, when they go low, we go high, had been misconstrued for so many years in Democratic politics. It's one of my pet peeves. And it's one of those things, you know how you get an idea in your head and then you crowbar it into 15 columns and hope that somebody finally picks it up. So I started doing that like 4 or 5 years ago because I just felt like people were misunderstanding that statement as a prescription for a certain kind of aesthetic or a prescription for manners and, you know, how you're supposed to talk about these things. And I think it was always designed to be a statement about a point on a moral compass and not really an aesthetic identity. And I have to guess that she's been frustrated by a lot of those interpretations. So the speech almost felt like a rebuttal to that. You know, she kind of said, we do have to fight where people live. And, you know, it's important to do that in a way that's not, she didn't say this directly, but this is what I thought the implication was, that doesn't feel alienated and very like removed or is more worried about feeling highbrow than it is about being effective or relatable. And I think, you know, by contrast, he sort of went back to some of the unity through lines that I think didn't work for Biden. And, you know, they might have been effective on some fronts during an era where people, I think, or some people thought, you know, liberalism was a good idea. But now it just sounds tone deaf a little bit. So he didn't talk about it, I think, as much as he would have 10 years ago. But he did talk a lot about national reconciliation. And I think that felt a little bit out of place. But he also, his vibe was there. You know, he didn't feel out of place. I mean, the dick joke took a lot of the edge off. So,
yeah,
you know.
He didn't feel out of place. And I think there was more bite to his speech than maybe when I say he could have given at any point in the past 20 years, I'm exaggerating for effect. It's a rhetorical device. But it was Michelle who seemed to embody actually like in a physical way, almost like her presence was the one of, we cannot just make nice, they are coming for us, and we need to be able to be strong.
Yeah,
right?
and I think
in the presence of this attack.
She's always been a formidable speaker.
Yeah.
And she's always kind of had that presence when you see her speaking directly. I think when he was in the White House and she was the first lady, there were fewer opportunities to see that side of her. And I think she was a little bit more restricted in terms of what she could say and how she could say it. And she very much had to stay within these strictures of what was considered acceptable mode of communication at the time. And so I think in a way, like this is a better time for her than when she was in the White House in terms of the way that she naturally communicates and her persona and her normal temperament toward these things.
I think that what you said about the misalignment between her when they go low, we go high, what people took from that versus what she meant from that. I guess I'm one of the people that took it the wrong way.
I wrote the last column that I wrote was probably a month ago, and it was right before Biden dropped out. And I wrote that I was kind of tired of a certain class of political operatives having been brainwashed by Aaron Sorkin's The West Wing to think that the whole show, and don't get me wrong, I watched the show like everybody else. I enjoyed it.
A good walk and talk, sure.
I did not consider it a documentary. And I also thought, it sort of operated in this paradigm where unity was a desirable goal for its own sake. And that, you would always see the president reaching across the aisle to some, misguided but not insane Republican who wanted to, essentially could find some common ground with. And there was a lot of this sort of communication style that I'm talking about where you're using, policy terms to talk about things as if it's 1956 and we're not in the media environment that we're in now, where the discourse takes place all over the internet, everywhere. And people are used to sort of talking about these things in more colloquial terms and with a lot more context, and sometimes with, like memes and jokes. So you sort of have to use language and diction that people actually recognize from their daily life. And you don't really have that in the West Wing that much, or you have it behind closed doors. But when you look at how the politicians in the West Wing communicate to their own constituencies, there's still that level of formalism to it. And so in the column, I kind of argued that it would be nice if Democrats would ditch that because they sort of take the wrong lessons from the way that the right communicates to its constituencies. And they sort of, to go back to the when they go low, we go high aspect of this, they think the right is effective just because they're being crass or they're saying things that appeal to a racist base, and that is part of it. But also, they're speaking to them as if they're kind of peer level. They're not, delivering these messages in ex cathedra kind of way. And so I think this big communication shift that you see right now is kind of exactly what I was hoping for when I wrote that column. And, I think maybe 10 years ago, you couldn't have done that, or nobody would have thought it would work, because sometimes people consider the popular dialogue to be something that's exterior to politics. The memes you see on the internet, like that's just for people who are extremely online. And the reality is everybody's online now. Like there is such a thing as too insidery, but that is just where people live. And so I'm pretty happy to see this shift personally.
Yes, as a Democratic consultant, I would love if you could speak to and maybe validate my observation. I would appreciate that, especially, but obviously, whatever it is you have to say, you know more than I do. There has been this incredible shift in how the presidential campaign of the Democratic Party is speaking, right? I saw a headline that described the Harris Comm team as feral 25-year-olds. To which I say, give them whatever they need, except for Adderall, because I want them to keep like freaking out. I would love if you agree with that, and also to talk about, some sober consultants have said that this onlineness of the Harris campaign is going to be alienating. That this reliance on memes is too insidery. I've been loving it. Like I feel like I'm old now, so someone had to explain Brat Summer to me, but
it doesn't have
for the most
to
part,
be,
I'm really enjoying it.
The thing is, it doesn't have to be a pop culture meme, though. I think people, when they think memes, they think, Reddit pilled stuff that you do have to spend a lot of time online to understand, or you have to be, 16 to understand. But a meme is something as simple as, Tim Walz calling JD Vance weird.
Right.
It's like that's a meme. And the reason why it works is, and it doesn't have to go as far as, at the rate, when they say Donald Trump says stuff that people are thinking, what they mean is that they think bigoted things and they have a bigoted worldview, and Trump articulates it and gives them permission to articulate it. In a way, weird performs the same function, but without dehumanizing entire groups of people. Weird is a very nice Midwestern way of saying fucked up, which you can't put in official political messaging, but you can go, that's weird, and everybody knows you mean that's fucked up. And yes, that's a way of, explaining to voters that you understand why they're outraged at some of the stuff.
So it's not just using drill tweets as pieces of political communication, although I do personally love that.
Oh, I love it. But
it is a different way of thinking about political communication.
And the thing about the drill tweets, I've always had trouble when I've had very traditional political clients, getting them to sort of wrap their heads around the idea that their political messaging isn't just competing with whoever the opposition's political messaging, or whatever the opposition's political messaging is. It's competing with literally anything you could pay attention to and be more compelled by in the moment. And that's a wider universe of stuff. And so, one good aspect of having some of the meme content out there that just kind of travels on its own is that that's really cheap earned media. Like you can go pay a political comms professional to issue press releases all day, but if they don't get picked up because they're anodyne and they feel so generic that they're indistinguishable from Republican messaging, it's like, what's the point? Meanwhile, Tim Walz calls JD Vance weird, and it's all over the place instantly, and it works. So I think some of it goes back to, again, snobbery about lowbrow stuff, and this sort of perception that gravitas or seriousness in politics is somehow tied up with humorlessness and, highbrow ideas and diction. And I think that's a conflation of two things that are just not particularly relevant to each other. So,
and I want to call myself out in saying that Drill is somehow insidery online. For one thing, Drill, the internet comedian, the absurd tweeter, when Twitter was Twitter, is actually of a certain age, number one. And number two, I am thinking of the "please don't put in the newspaper that I'm mad" tweet, and how what makes a meme is actually not necessarily that it comes from a particular person or that you recognize that meme from something else. It's that it captures some idea, right?
Yes.
Like, don't put it in the paper that I'm mad. It's funny even if you don't know who Drill is.
Yeah.
Especially if it captures what seems to be happening in the Trump campaign 24/7, which is this like, we're not mad. No, don't put in the paper that we're mad. And then they keep saying they're mad. Right?
Yeah. No,
so
it's, I mean, that's exactly it. But, that was sort of the original idea of meme. And then we sort of culturally decided that it only applied to the internet and a certain type of, material. But, clearly that's not true. Like when we think about, for instance, the extent to which a lot of politics are negotiated through culture, I mean, now enough that we sort of consider its own category, the culture war, which I always thought was a category era because it's all politics,
It's all culture. It's all politics, both.
And I think the fact that Taylor Swift has a political valence now, like it's really hard to say you can separate, politics from the world we live in, where people's sort of ideas and values are shaped by so many things that are not just an understanding of policy or policy values, And they never have been, you know. Like, I think also part of the reason why the new communication style works is that it's not leaning as much on this idea that America strives to be unified in a way that it never has been. You know, it was always a fiction.
Yeah.
When people talk about eras that where they, particularly whenever I hear political consultants of a certain age talk about eras where they thought the communication style was stronger, it was leading to more unity, you know, they're always referencing a period where certain groups were heavily disenfranchised, and the people who were largely controlling the discourse were, you know, older white and male and cis. And you know, it's like, well, maybe that was more comfortable for people who were older white male and cis, but it certainly wasn't good for a lot of people. So, you know, I was also pretty happy to see them ditch that idea, because I do think people want unity, but only in the sense that they want a monoculture that reflects whatever their worldview is. So
I think this gets us back to the difference between Barack and Michelle's speeches, because for listening to Obama, what you do get is this post-politics vision, right? Where like we put politics aside and have dinner together, right?
Yeah.
And Michelle's vision encompasses who we are is political.
Yep.
Who she is political. And it's probably a difference in their upbringing, I'm guessing. That like her line about that job that Trump wants is a black job highlights we all exist in political context. Who we are is political. By simply being a black woman, where she stands, the fact of her being on that stage says something.
Yeah, and they, you know, because they're, you know, first black couple in the White House, they are, or, you know, at the presidential level, they suffered a lot of racism and a lot of harassment, but I think she got a sort of like oddly disproportional, like in ways that he didn't, simply because he could conform to certain norms of being in the White House, and she, by virtue of being a woman, you know, simply can't. By being a black woman in particular, and one who was not, I think, you know, Hillary Clinton was this way too, but was not reluctant to, you know, take positions that might be a little bit controversial for a first lady to take. And she's just, you know, incredibly, there was somebody I was reading this morning who said that they had worked a little bit with Barack, and then they met Michelle at some event or whatever, and was just so blown away by her. They said, you know, I remember being impressed with Barack, but just bowled over by her, you know? So you have, I think sometimes, or normally, you know, you have a sort of president and a first lady, and the first lady's somewhere here in the background, and the man is always considered the more formidable of the two. And with them, you have a, you know, they're peers, they're equals, and it comes across every time they talk about each other or you see them side by side. And I think that created a lot of blowback for her, because she's dealing with racism, but also misogyny and stepping out of traditional gender roles. So she's gotten the brunt of it, I think, in certain ways where it would make it almost impossible for her not to have that orientation toward these issues.
You've given me a chance to pull out the When I Met Barack Obama story. I'll try to keep it short. So it was actually at the Democratic Convention in 2004, so 20 years ago. Oh. I was covering it as a blogger, which you might remember this, Elizabeth. That was a big deal.
I remember
at
that.
The time.
Yeah.
It's a huge deal.
Some of us worked for some not that cuddly bosses during that period.
Yes. So I was covering it as a blogger for MTV, and I was going to do an interview for the Today Show. And so I was in the bowels of the Fleet Center in Boston, where the Today Show was broadcasting from, and I was in the sort of makeshift green room, and there was this guy, this tall, skinny black guy, also there. He was speaking that night, I knew, as a young candidate for Senate in Illinois. And the story I was doing for MTV was actually just a trend story about Blackberries, because those were also new at the time. And he was on his Blackberry. And I asked if I could interview him for the story about his, I think I said, so, oh, I see you have a Blackberry. And he was like, oh, yeah, you know, like everyone back then. He was like, yeah, I'm kind of addicted. He didn't say it exactly like that because he's Barack Obama. But And I said, can I get an interview with you about that? You know, about you being on your phone all the time. And he goes, my wife would kill me. He was like, if I admitted to that, my wife would kill me. So yes, there is a clear sense of equality, if not some, and I mean, I tell that story, obviously, it's obviously not browbeaten, but the idea that he was even kind of like, I got to talk to my wife first. I mean, struck me at the time, of course. I think I wanted to add also on this, how Michelle has gotten a tougher beat in some ways. It is a meme on the right that she's transgender.
Oh yeah, no, I have a family full of Trump voters in rural Alabama. I've seen that stuff, and it's just, it's, first of all, like, we're in a moment where transphobia is at a just all-time high, and any woman who doesn't conform to specific gender expectations and doesn't look like a demure little blonde trad wife princess, gets accusations of being trans or just hostile to men, whatever. And I think she's partly because it's very triggering to right-wing conservative men when a woman is both beautiful and powerful. Like, they just lose their shit. And you see Trump doing this now. He keeps talking about Kamala's appearance, and at one point he was like, I'm better looking than she is. And it's just, what are you, if he had not already filled the public's brain with so much crap, like, just a statement like that would have been not just picked apart, but just laughed at endlessly. And he can't help himself, and neither can, a lot of these people. They just,
they can't help. Yes. Well, also, they're so used to coming from a position of power.
Yes.
The idea that they would be made fun of is itself triggering, right? Like, that's why the reactions to the weirdness meme.
Well, it's not just, I think everybody makes a big deal about the fact that, that there are a lot of men fear being laughed at more than anything, but they also fear being people thinking they're dumb. And particularly when it's a smart woman they're dealing with, they really, the kind of people who have that sort of, deep-seated misogyny, it's just as bad for a woman to be accomplished and smart, maybe tell them something they didn't already know, as it is to be, strikingly beautiful. It's all of the same piece. And I think, she's just, she's a massive overachiever. She's brilliant. She's gorgeous. And she's black. Like, that's, if you're a racist white guy who doesn't like women, or at least thinks that they're second-class citizens or they should be kept in their place, like, somebody like Michelle Obama is going to make them crazy.
So I want to draw on your expertise as a consultant about a couple of things. And the first one that comes to mind, since we're talking about Trump, and actually some stuff that Michelle said as well, is the sugar high of doing well.
Yeah.
Right? The sugar high of vibes.
Mm-hmm.
I personally think that calling what's happening now vibes is a little dismissive. Like, I think there is something bigger happening.
Yes.
But at the same time, and Michelle's the one who pointed this out, like, they could still win, folks.
Oh yeah, I think I think this is also just trauma from 2016, where everybody felt pretty good the day before the election, and then it all went to shit. So I think also some of it is that I do think the political press does a very bad job of articulating what public opinion is and what it means. And some of this is just, I fucking hate horse race coverage, drives me crazy, but every news outlet in existence does it. I don't like it when people misinterpret polls or they think they're predictive in a way that they're not. And I think all those things contribute to people being very discombobulated about what's going on. And it is natural for humans to look at their communities around them and say, is the way that I feel about this normal or outside of the range of things? And so when there's a media narrative that here's what's happening, and here's what's supposed to be happening, there's any sort of divergence between the two, it makes people feel insecure. And I know a lot of, how do I put this, highly engaged people who believe that they can sort of handicap what's going to happen at this point. I mean, almost to the extent that, I've had, friends who are like, well, maybe if we go to the Republican primary in this battleground state and vote for the worst candidate. We'll sabotage the whole thing. And it's like, oh God, no. Like you just, that sort of thing drives me crazy. And because it's not really reflective of what's happening in the electorate. I don't think, like a lot of people do, that polling is entirely broken, because where I see people being led astray by it, it's always, most of the time it's bad survey design, like just asking the wrong question. And then sometimes it's misinterpreting the results. My favorite example of this is, I'm sure you've seen, there have been a bunch of polls asking Republican and Democratic women whether they would be willing to date somebody who is a member of the opposite party. And of course, fewer Democratic women say they would. And this has been cast in a million columns that I've read as, Democrats being less tolerant of people who have different ideas. And it's like, when people, that's the takeaway, you're misunderstanding the results. It's not that the data is wrong. It's that you don't understand that a normal voter hears that question, and what they hear is, would you date somebody who had wildly different values than you do? Not, it's not about partisanship technically, it's about something else. And so I think it just, it gives people distorted notions about what's happening. And I do understand the distrust and the sort of hesitancy people have to get truly excited about this, because, everybody's had the experience of getting super into something and then having it blow up, or, like your favorite team chokes at the last minute, whatever. And I do think that people are also very aware that there's an electoral advantage for Republicans, and, we could work our asses off and still not win. So I get the caution and why Michelle Obama says, I know it feels good right now, but we don't have it in the bag and you still have to work, because she's not wrong. But it doesn't mean that all the vibes are, fake, or that they're just a sugar high. I don't think that's true at all.
I think I agree, and also want to say, how do I put it? I think there is, all emotions are valid. And to me, I don't want to call it a sugar high, but there is like this excitement because we're at this such a low point before, right? Like the debate, the Biden debate performance was an arrow to the heart, I think, for a lot of people. And then the attempted assassination of Trump was a moment where we're like, oh shit, they're gonna be able to like paint him as a martyr, and we still have this guy who doesn't seem super capable of campaigning. And then we had Biden stepping down, then we had Walz, and we have all this stuff. And so there is this, I think there is a level of high that cannot necessarily be sustained completely.
Well, that's, in terms of like the novelty moments where it's like, oh, we haven't seen this before. Sure, the novelty is going to wear off, but you see it translating very directly into actual momentum, record level, new registrations, fundraising, blowouts. Like if you're seeing real results like that, it's not just a momentary thing. And we don't really have that much time left. So, the one advantage of this happening so late in the cycle is that you don't have to sustain this momentum for a year. We have how many days left?
And I completely agree. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I feel like you're right. Maybe it's just a hangover from 2016. Or it has to do with the fact that even looking beyond the election, I think another reason why, when I think about the Obama years or even with Biden's election, there was this sense of that election was the final victory, right? Yeah. Like this sense of like, all right, like when we fight, we win. Like I think for a lot of people, especially like white Democratic voters, I'm just middle class people, people who are pretty safe in a lot of ways, although we're all threatened right now, for sure. Somebody like the right person winning is like, all right, whew, yeah, like we got through that one, breathe a sigh of relief. And I don't think that's what that slogan necessarily means to everyone. I especially don't think that's what it means to people who have been fighting for a long time.
Yeah.
But the fight continues after the election.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It'll feel a little harder.
What I think is happening now, and this is why you haven't seen disagreement over, like Gaza rip everybody apart in the last, and it's being litigated certainly, but I think the way that people are thinking about this in a way is a little bit different than, for instance, the years of enthusiasm when Barack Obama was coming up. I think people sort of feel like it's a sort of limited purpose unity. Like, let's just get past.
In a good way.
Yeah. I think I think it's okay. We can still negotiate these things during the convention, even. But I think people are willing to kind of look at the macro picture, and they sort of know that there are at this point two choices. I don't think anybody's. One of the more funnier things of the last couple of days is the RFK campaign saying explicitly that they're not sure which party they would more align with, but they're inclined to maybe go Trump just because they don't. It's like these are just nihilists, and I can't. It's kind of nice to not worry about them being. I think their spoiler advantage is just evaporated.
Yeah, I agree. And we want to give full credit, or I want to give full credit to the protesters, the pro-Palestinian anti-genocide protesters. I want to give full credit to everyone who never, ever stopped saying reproductive justice and reproductive freedom and the word abortion over and over and over, who dragged that onto the stage, right? And there are people on the left who know that the election is not a victory, right?
Yeah.
And I'm glad to see, but I'm also glad to see that those people who know that election's not a victory also know that election can be a defeat, right?
Yeah.
The sense of we will help in this election because we want to keep fighting,
Yeah, and I think,
not because if the other guy wins, we're not even going to be able to keep fighting.
Yeah. I think there's another kind of orientation thing that happened, and partly because of Dobbs. I've had clients in, purple states and even red states where, you're working with Democrats in areas where either the odds are low or they're very, close. And in a lot of those states, Democrats do skew a little bit more conservative. But I've also seen that interpreted as if they want kind of quasi-Republican messaging directed at them, which I don't believe is the case. And, and we did some polling in Alabama in 2017 during the Doug Jones Senate special. And I remember abortion messaging tested really well. And you just could not get Democrats in Alabama to use it because the higher ups always think that there's some on the fence Republican moderate who would be turned off by pro-choice messaging. Even though by definition, if you're a single issue abortion voter, you're not voting for a Democrat anyway. So there's this sort of over catering to some hypothetical median voter where all they want is just a few steps more to the right on everything. And it's just, I feel like now it's just clear that that's just a fantasy. There's no, ideology isn't like a linear continuum. You can be highly liberal and highly conservative on things at the same time. But I think a lot of strategic decision-making has been driven by the idea that there is this mythical median voter that if you just engineer your policies more toward an ideological middle, they get excited and they decide they're not going to be Republicans anymore. And it's just nonsense.
Yes, that independent voter, the moderate voter.
Yeah, most independents are partisan. Most of them, like 80% of them, have voted for the same party in every election for a decade. So also conflating independent with swing voter, not the same thing.
Yeah. So is there anything else you want to talk about? We've hit a lot of the stuff that I was struck by. Maybe the only thing I was struck by that we haven't talked about is Doug Emhoff, who...
I love him.
He has a fantasy football team named Nirvana. I'm ready to marry him too. There's probably a line. I love that he was adorable.
There are all these men, it's somebody said something that I thought was very true, that part of the reason why Tim Walz and Emhoff and, a lot of these guys trigger the right is that they're demonstrating that you can be a straight white guy and not be a douchebag. It's not hard, and I think there's also just some relief to see men who are willing to be, role models in that respect, because there's just when the most visible people in American politics who are white straight men are like Donald Trump and JD Vance. Like I've got a 9-year-old son. Like I want to see more Waltzes and Imhoffs so that he has, people to look to.
Yeah, and that they've gotten a lot of mileage out of the soy boy trope of like what a woke man looks like, which is say not like a man, right?
Yeah.
And that Walz and Imhoff both are like, it's not even just not. We want to deconstruct, gender stereotypes, right? Gender norms, like it's
Walz
great.
Looks like a walking Budweiser commercial. Like there's
know.
no. I mean, the thing about the, what is a man kind of
gender norms are bad, but also it's really cool to see someone who fits externally a lot of gender norms, but then shows that those are just exterior.
Yeah. And I mean, you and I think, have both written a little bit about the dark sides of the internet. And if you ever go on these men's rights boards where they're defining certain things as being alpha or beta or whatever, it always boils down to what their attitude toward women is. Like even the sort of like need to look like a buffed ripped gym dude. Like it's always about, well, this is what women want because they're shallow. And it's like, no, you guys are just doing that for each other. Like but it really is, it's, scratch a self-proclaimed alpha guy and you just get misogyny. And so I think it's, watching Imhoff just be so like genuinely supportive and enthusiastic and just not threatened or insecure at all about his wife's success is really, and not just for men who are looking at his model, but for those of us who work, and we, our partners are like that. And it's,
Yeah. I think there is something just really beautiful too, to see their families.
Yes.
Right. The first blended presidential family in the White House would be, I'm getting a little teary about it. Like,
it's moving.
It doesn't seem like a big deal, but it's really moving most of us grew up not most of us, but this is a generation where everyone is divorced. Everyone, like, that's a norm, right?
Yeah.
And to see that's not, like, not only is like getting divorced okay, but then there is this like whole other story that's a happy story about a family that has been through divorce.
Yeah, and this is also where the right keeps punching themselves in the face. They keep sort of pointing to like happy families and going, that is not correct. That is not what a happy while they look miserable themselves, the sort of JD Vance kind of, his defense of his wife was like, well, she's not white, but and I just thought, oh my God, like there's just, and so it's, then of
course Trump and Melania being like uncomfortable to look at.
Yes, yes. But it's so nice to see. It just sort of puts the lie to the idea that Republicans are the party of family values, like because they're making it so clear that what they mean is like a very narrow conception of family that does not apply to much of America. And so imagine how you feel if you are an undecided voter, one of the three. You probably are like, is he talking about my family? Like, is my family fucked up because we're divorced or I have stepkids? Like, like let him keep talking. But
there's a part of me that wants to go back to talking about how this still looks pretty good. Like I want to like ask you as the consultant, like, but tell me we're going to win, right? Like we're going to win.
Well,
when a client does that, what do you say?
I think I know this sounds crazy, but it's still too early to tell.
Okay.
Like you really can't, I always sort of have to explain to friends that like polling is not forecasting. It's just a snapshot of public opinion right this second. And in order to be accurate, the survey has to be done well, has to be fielded well, all this other stuff. So if you do a poll 2 days before the election, it might correlate with being accurate just because it's that close. And, there are some forecasters who do, good work, but I think there's so many weird contextual things in this election that you just really can't account for in a forecast. So I do think you can kind of look at the numbers and look at her polling and, where it's trending directionally and make some assumptions. But anything could happen. So I'm not gonna make any predictions.
And I have to bring it back to my own statement from a while ago, which is that winning or losing this particular presidential election is not the end of the fight.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually good that the Gaza conversation is happening simultaneously and at the DNC, because it's a good way to remind people that this is just, one step among many that, problems that we need to solve. It sort of keeps everybody in the larger picture in a way.
So speaking of like masterful communication moments, a lot of people were chuckling at that simulcast moment when they showed two full houses at the convention, right? There's the one happening in Chicago, and then Harris and Walz filling a convention center, the convention center that where the RNC was held.
Yeah.
And there is a thought that this was like a direct poke at, as Obama would put it, crowd size.
Yeah. I mean, I also like that, again, prior cycles, people would have been so risk averse about something like that. Like they would have been like, well, what if we offend two people who really care about manners? And now I think they sort of realize that, part of what this does is it gives the base a sense of community. You can kind of laugh at stuff together, which makes people feel really good, and it's important to whip the base because there's a knock-on effect. It's not, historically, I think a lot of political messaging is really directed toward the marginal voter, the person who's lower engagement, who needs to vote, or, hypothetical swing voter. But the thing is, if you can't whip the base, those are the people who volunteer, and they're far better at recruiting undecided voters than any kind of political ad. So getting people excited, even if it's just because they're in a room sharing the same joke and feeling good together, there's value in that. So, I think it's effective, and I hope they keep doing it.
To make it sort of really put a point on that, the idea that Trump might have seen that simulcast and might have had some personal infuriation
I think they finally
is great, but actually in some ways not the point.
Yeah. I mean, I think they finally, they do understand the value in strategically trolling Trump, because when he's kind of predictable in the way that he reacts. But yeah, the point is to kind of build a sense of community and share a narrative about what's happening. And, humor can do that. So,
yeah. And that's, for now, let's just go call that's what's working for now. Let's keep going. Elizabeth Spiers, a consultant to Democratic campaigns and a contributing writer for the New York Times opinion section. Thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
A lot has changed in our lives since the early 90s, but my team name is still Nirvana. Yes, after the band.